Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Patch 9.15 dropped in with a few changes that saw a shakeup for the Mythic Plus season of Season 2, with many abilities becoming uncapped in AoE, and finally with the freedom to change covenants anytime you want to, we saw some fresh new faces rising in popularity for Mythic dungeons. And I do mean popularity, not the classes that can push the highest keys, as majority keys are ran anywhere between M+10s but below M+20s. And I wanted to see which specs are seeing the most amount of play in Mythic Pluses. Obviously, at the end of the day, you should play whatever you like. I'm a huge fan of underdog specs and playstyles. But in case you got some alts up and running, maybe for 9.2, maybe for the Mage Tower, and you just try to get your weeklies done like weekly 15s, which spec is going to get you into the key the fastest? And that's what we want to take a look at and explore today. Right before we take a look at that though, most of you guys watch these videos are still not subscribed, and the more of you I ask, the more of you do, so let's keep it going. Subscribe to the channel as well as hit the bell, especially if you're interested in videos like these where we look at the data and discuss different aspects of WoW, or if you simply want to catch future updates with Mage Tower and 9.2 hitting PTR sometime soon. We're gonna start off with the Warrior, a class that I've been having a lot of fun with. Arms and Fury are both competitive, and I've done relatively well in Mythic Pluses, though Fury Warrior in both the upper end keys as well as popularity has definitely overtaken in 9.15. At the beginning of Season 2, Arms Warrior was definitely the star of the season, having an early good progression inside of the new raid. Good performance in Mythic Pluses, and exceptionally good performance in PvP. And they were looking to only get better in 9.15. The early buffs for Arms were buff to Blade Storm to become uncapped in AoE, buff to Whirlwind to become also uncapped in AoE, and a Conduit to further buff the damage of your Whirlwind after a Blade Storm. To me, this felt like a perfect combo to solidify Arms Warrior's dominance in all things AoE. However, Fury snuck in and hijacked all these buffs. You have Whirlwind, you can use the Conduit for the Whirlwind, and you can talent to Blade Storm, so Fury gets all the benefits that Arms does. But the two factors that make it more preferred for more players is 1. Easier time generating rage and spending it, as Fury builds rage with so many of your abilities where Arms can have downtime for it, but also in rage, the 25% extra haste on top of a fast-paced playstyle makes it even faster, and the only thing that's holding you from not playing Fury is potential carpal tunnel. When talking about monks, there's no point of arguing that Windwalker is one of the strongest melee DPS when it comes to AoE. Whether your tank is rounding up the whole instance or you're just fighting more than one target, your Windwalker monk will always have the advantage over every other melee in the game. Plus, they did the unthinkable. They decided to uncap the damage of spinning crane kick in AoE situations. That together with Bone Dust Brew, and you're a walking nuke. So of course, with such a generous buff, many players picked up monks. They're still not the most popular class in the game in general, but for Mythic Pluses, I had the easiest time getting my into keys even on a lower item level just because I play a Windwalker. But you also have an access to a healing spec and a tanking spec, which both are not terrible in 9.15 right now. So you have a lot of options and a lot of reasons to get into just about any group. While Warlocks didn't really get too many uncaps in AoE, being able to change it up to whatever covenant you want to definitely gave them more flexibility. Depending whether you need a Venthyr, Night Fae, and Necrolord for your key for whatever buffs they bring, Warlocks is a perfect class for it. While Affliction is generally dominating the top end for a lot of the mid-tier where a majority of players play, you are seeing Destruction Warlocks doing quite well. Destruction is the one spec that can cleave a little bit, it's got a bit of AoE, it can do well in big pulls, it can really truck down bosses in single target damage, so it has this flexibility, and also a bunch of different covenants that you can play with. Like that room before the first boss in Plaguefall, if your tank can pull all the slimes, hit him with a Venthyr dot, hit him with Cataclysm, it is probably the most amount of fun I've had as Destruction. At least that's what I've been doing as of recently, as I'm exploring different covenants on my Warlock. Overall, as a range, they're not really considered by a majority of the community as a strong range DPS for Mythic Pluses, but from my experience, they're still very fun and plenty effective. Shamans didn't really get anything new in 9.15, where so many classes got more covenant choices in terms of being able to switch and viable builds, as well as AoE uncaps. Shamans for the most part already had the freedom to play just about any covenant they want to, but also their AoE was already mostly uncapped. We were hoping to see Enhancement get some benefits in that department, but nothing happened as of yet. Currently, the strongest specs for Shamans to play is Elemental. They're getting quite a bit of play in Mythic Pluses, but it might be even easier to get into groups as Restoration. You do a little bit of damage like as if you're Elemental, but you're mostly there to heal. It's a solid healer to this day. It didn't get too many changes, but before 9.15 it was already a really high-end competitor, so nothing changed. It still is a really good competitor for healing, and as a healer I generally find it easier to get into groups than I do as a DPS. In the past, it's been a safe choice to play as a marksmanship hunter when it comes to doing dungeons. However, there's a bit more room to play around with different specs, as Beastmaster got a pretty big buff going into 9.15, with a lot of its AoE abilities finally becoming uncapped. Abilities like Multi-Shot and Bestial Wrath can now hit multiple targets. Marksman Hunters saw also some abilities getting uncapped, but they're still locked to Trick Shots for a lot of their AoE. Trick Shot is a buff that you activate with certain abilities that lets your aim shot and rapid fire ricochet to enemies, but you're still capped on how many enemies can get hit by it, and that's where a majority of your AoE damage lies in, compared to Beastmastery, who is completely uncapped with their pet damage. Plus, Beastmastery is easier to play than Marksman, where Marksman has abilities that you gotta weave together for the most amount of damage, overlapping buffs, especially if you play Kyrian. There's a lot of strict rotational things about it. Beastmastery rotation is far easier, just a bleed to maintain, kill command and cooldown, multi-shot in AoE, or cobra shot on single target. And that's it. A lot of your abilities are insta-cast, so you can do it on the move, and majority of players can jump around the battlefield while executing the rotation flawlessly. The two benefits of extra AoE damage and an easier playstyle is a lot easier for many players to pick up, which explains why they've become more popular as of 9.15. Paladins are really not bad as of 9.15. Retribution saw Divine Storm getting uncapped in AoE, and Protection Paladins are a lot more common and accepted, especially since they've done so well in the competitive side of M+. Though to this day it's still very hard to overtake the popularity of a Holy Paladin in keys. I've been playing my Holy Paladin recently. It's not quite as fun as a Mistweaver, but as a melee healer it is definitely top notch. What I found is Holy Paladin is probably the most reactive healer in the game. Where other healers have to set up for big damage, Holy Paladins can just press Word of Glory or Holy Shock, and as long as you have wings on top of that, your heals are healing somebody for half of their health bar, which is amazing if, let's say, you get surprised by a bunch of damage, you could just quickly recover. This healer is awesome for anybody who is trying to heal dungeons for the first time ever. Especially good if you came from a melee background before, if you played warriors, rogues, monks, demon hunters, and you just want to heal some dungeons. This will feel a lot more natural. And I'm sure there's some really tricky moments and really clutch plays you can do at 29s where you really need to know the master of your class, though doing 15s, 14s, 12s as my paladin, I've never really felt like my group was in trouble no matter the affix, no matter the dungeon that we ran. For rogues you have two good options, Outlaw Rogue and Subtlety. At least right now, Outlaw Rogue is slightly more popular than Subtlety, though as a rogue main, let me tell you, it's trending towards sub. If I have to just pick one spec for this class, I will pick Subtlety. It's incredibly strong right now for 9.15. Subtlety is very efficient in Mythic Pluses right now because it benefited from the AoE uncaps. Shuriken Storm as well as Black Powder, two of your abilities that you used in the AoE, both got uncapped, which significantly increased the damage output of the spec in AoE scenarios. Your single target damage prior to this was fantastic from the get-go, so this spec saw big gains, and I think over time we will see Subtlety overtake an Outlaw Rogue in popularity, even though Outlaw Rogue right now is just slightly ahead of sub. I think over time that number will change. Priest is another class that didn't really get too many changes into 9.15. There were some AoE uncapping or capping, mostly for Disc as well as Holy for a few talents that don't really get that much play. Maybe those talents will become more relevant in 9.2, but Priest for the most part didn't really change. The most popular spec out of them is Holy, which is, in my opinion, the easiest healer to get into. The way that Holy Priest was built is it has a little bit of everything that other healer has. You have group healing, you have local area healing, you have healing over time, you have heals that bounce, you have big emergency healing, you have slow, powerful heals, you have quick heals, you have a variety of different healing styles and benefits that fit any kind of scenario. With a class that has two healing specs, obviously one of them is going to be really good, and people always look for healers for dungeons, so Holy Priest ended up being the de facto best spec for this class. It's also worth mentioning that Shadow Priests aren't bad either. They're plenty viable, and if you want a DPS for your Mythic Pluses, you could do it as a Shadow. It's a lot easier to get into dungeons as a healer or as a tank role, It felt like a no-brainer to make Holy kind of the standout spec for this class. At the start of Season 2, Mages went through a bit of a roller coaster. Some of the heavy nerfs towards fire forced a lot of players to look outside of the box, and many players found themselves playing Arcane. After a bit of time, players warmed back up to fire mages and started picking them out for Mythic Pluses all over again. But currently in 9.15, Frost Mage is kind of where everybody else is at right now, and is definitely the most popular spec in all kinds of content, top end, low end, and mid end. This spec saw actual uncaps in AoE, primarily from Frozen Orb and the Legendary of Glacial Fragments. By making Frozen Orb uncapped in AoE, Ice Events can reset faster because of a conduit that they can run, and with the freedom to change Covenants left and right, you have options. You can play Necrolord, Venthyr, Nightfae, even Kyrian. Depending on the dungeon, or depending if you need more AoE or single target, Mages can adjust left and right. You also don't have to worry about cooldowns as much. For a Fire Mage or Arcane Mage, you want the tank to pull big, pull half of the room inside of the dungeon instance with as many mobs as you can to get the most value out of your cooldowns. But if in 15s or 14s your tanks are skittish, they want to go a little slower, maybe the affixes are forcing them to run a little slower, not pull as many mobs, maybe a lack of experience, Frostmage will define at 2 targets, Frostmage will define with big pulls, so you'll have that flexibility and you don't have to worry about your cooldowns nearly as much as you would as Fire or Arcane. When it comes to Death Knights, the 2 popular specs are going to be Blood Death Knight and Unholy. On paper, Frost is the spec that is pushing for higher keys, but in terms of the raw population of Frost versus Unholy, Unholy wins out by a mile. I think a lot of it comes from an Unholy Death Knight identity being established as the AoE spec from previous seasons. So maybe over time as players try out Frost, they'll see that it's actually not a bad spec, it's actually viable for Mythic Pluses and will get more popularity over time. But as of right now, Unholy is a really fun spec. It does incredibly good AoE damage, and on single targets you're cooldown reliant, but in AoE you just make sure to spread dots on everybody and kind of blast out AoE. They're very similar to sub-rogues in a way, except ironclad in plate with an undead ghoul by their side, but very similar gameplay. Very cooldown heavy for pure single target, and like a really simplistic, easy, fun rotation for AoE. But if for some reason Unholy doesn't work out for you, you can always queue up as a Blood Death Knight. They're actually pretty popular, and people are always looking for tanks for dungeons anyway. If you know how to play a Blood DK and can do more healing than the healer, which is pretty common for them apparently, then you should be able to survive any encounter as long as you have the mechanical skill to play a Death Knight to the best extent. For Druids, none of the 9.15 updates really were influential. There was some uncap in AoE for Feral Druids, but that didn't really increase their standing in Mythic Pluses. To this day, as a Druid, you have 2 very powerful options that are some of the best meta picks in the game: the Guardian Druid and the Boomkin. For Guardian Druids, it has become a little bit more fun. Nothing changed for the spec, but a lot of your DPS can now hit multiple enemies more than ever before. So doing big pulls feels a little bit more rewarding since you're the only tank in the game that can easily survive pulling like 30, 40, 50 mobs at a time as long as you have Incarnation. I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of cool watching your group have this much explosive damage where you're just watching enemies melt. It is awesome knowing that you can pull bigger because your group is going to be able to adjust to your pull sizes. But it doesn't really change the gameplay too much. As a Guardian, you're still doing the same old, just everything you're going to be tanking melts a little bit faster. The same thing can be said about Boomkins. Nothing really changed. You didn't really get more abilities uncapped. You're still predominantly playing Venthyr, or at least majority of players are, so your gameplay doesn't change whatsoever. You were good before 9.15 and you're going to be good after 9.15. In patch 9.15, Demon Hunter saw Blade Dance get the uncapped treatment. There was even a conduit that got buffed that further enhances the damage of that Blade Dance. You also got Venthyr buffs, so your main Venthyr ability, Sinful Brand, now has a shorter cooldown, which means a little bit more single target output, so slightly better choices of Covenants that you want to play, and also slightly more AoE damage output as well. If you want an even easier time getting into dungeons, you can always switch to Vengeance, still a very popular tank. It made a name for itself from the first season of Shadowlands, and it continues the trend forward. It's a bit less of a cooldown reliant tank, but rather more of an active mitigation tank, and personally I enjoy that kind of playstyle, so if you're interested in tanking and you want to have a more active gameplay, this one is a definitely easy choice. And that's going to be my video on every popular spec for Season 2 of Mythic Plus of patch 9.15. I really do wonder how this will change going into 9.2. In the next build, we'll be getting tier sets as well as double legendaries, and who knows what other trinkets and items might impact which specs are going to be the strongest or the most popular going into the next season of Season 3 M+. Cannot wait for PTR to come out, so we might have a little bit of a glimpse of what is looking strong currently in the testing realm. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you find this video entertaining or informative, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate it. If you guys have any thoughts and ideas of maybe a spec that I missed that recently has gotten popular, let me know in the comments below. And what do you think is going to be really popular going into 9.2 based on some of the different double Legos and tier sets that got data mined so far? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to reach out to me directly, link towards the channel Discord is in the description of every single video. You guys are more than welcome to join Discord and join the community. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see all of you in the next one.